Good morning and happy Thursday to everyone. Thanks for attending today's Microsoft Power Apps presentation. If you've been a visitor along the way, as always, thank you very much. And if this is your first time, I hope you find this to be very useful and productive. So today's goals, what are we trying to accomplish today? Number one, provide some insight and information that is new to you, perhaps. Two, probably very important here, is determining if Power Apps can be relevant to your organization. Can it address a current need? And lastly, important for us here is demonstrate our ability to be a resource and a partner for you. We'll have introductions to the team here in a little bit, but I am Joe Paquette, Business Development Director in the Northeast. We'll want to understand Power Apps. Maybe more importantly, the why of Power Apps than the what. So why are we looking to use this? How does it work? What's new? And a brief demo. We'll talk about the resources available to you through New Era technology. And there will be a Q&A session. And on that note, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and note those in the chat or question boxes. If we are unable to answer them today, they are recorded, so we'll get those answers back out to you after the presentation. Executive leadership demanding applications to be mobile ready. The need to drive efficiencies up and costs down by digitizing paper forms. A request to create a single view of data that comes from disparate multiple systems. Now, imagine a way to solve those problems quickly, cost effectively, and without the pitfalls of complex development. That is what Power Apps can do, and that is what we'll be talking about today. So what are we seeing in the field? Common things from our customers. Certainly back to work have created new workflows that need to be addressed through systems. The request for mobile apps continues to grow and really places a stress on IT. The shortage of internal resources, and I'll add to that, the inability to hire external resources makes it difficult to meet these demands. And in general, deployment or development projects can be difficult to scope, to budget, and to execute. So what about you guys? We had the pre-webinar registration questions, and here's a few of those questions and answers to see where you fit in. So does your company have a need for an app such as a leave request, a service desk, or etc.? And 9 out of 10 is saying, yep, that's definitely something we could use. Number 2 was, with ongoing COVID procedures, does your company today have a solution to track visitors at the office? 6 out of 10 is saying, yes, we do, so that's great. And if the other 40% have that need, certainly we can address that through Power Apps. Do you need to create a customer-facing portal that can interact with your secure 365 data? Almost 70% are saying yes. And this is interesting. Do you have paper forms you are looking to digitize? And again, almost 70% are saying yes. Talk about a way to impact workflow if we are capturing data today on paper and then trying to put that into systems. If we could digitize that, great benefits. So before we get started into the content, I do want to make sure, especially for those that are joining for the first time, I do want to address who is New Era. How are we delivering flexible, resilient, and productive solutions? So 60 plus offices worldwide, approaching 3,000 employees. And you can see to the right some of these solutions and services that we'll be talking about. I do want to focus though on the employees. I think it's really important to note that our resources range from the engineers, designers, architects, installers, through the post-implementation support. So we are agnostic. We're here to support you from that very beginning research phase, through deployment, through post-support. Today, we'll be focusing really on the data networking practice as the Microsoft group comes from there, but I do want to touch upon the other offerings very briefly. Collaboration and communications. I think we have conversations around this every day. It's probably not a surprise. COVID had a real big impact on that, the ability and desire for companies to collaborate more effectively. But in that practice also, you'll see, contact center, large venue pro audio deployments, healthcare communications, video walls and signage, really illustrating the breadth of the service delivery available through this practice. Security and line safety. Security line safety for us is physical security, such as access control, video surveillance. Also includes our cybersecurity practice, managed detection and response, intrusion detection, all those traditional cybersecurity services. Cloud Blue. That is our as-a-service portfolio of cloud-delivered services. So you can see everything from down below contact center, Teams direct routing, UC, SIP, all part of the collaboration items we talked about, but also traditional backup, disaster recovery, and some really interesting video surveillance, managed video surveillance services. Managed services. Our ability through our NOC to provide managed services for your environment. Traditional IT, AV services, unified communications. So again, the ability to be that partner and resource for you. Professional services. At the heart, New Era is a professional services organization. I mentioned in the beginning our ability to be that partner from initial design research phase through post-implementation support. So we truly are there from beginning to end with a suite of professionals that can help you along that way. Data networking, I mentioned that we would focus on the Microsoft practice, which is where this lives, but also just know that everything in that data center, so traditional network infrastructure, wireless, smart buildings, structured cabling, a really big part of our organization. So Microsoft services, you'll see in the middle there, sort of the table stakes of what we offer. So traditional 365, the modern workplace environment, security. We're providing those services on a daily basis, allowing our customers to really leverage the 365 stack. Over to the left, you'll see some of the items. So we'll be focusing today on the PowerApps, Power Platform solutions, but also Azure, artificial intelligence, site recovery and backup. So a lot of offerings within the Microsoft stack. As mentioned, we'll be focusing on the PowerApp suite today, but just know as we go through the Microsoft suite with our customers, we're always focused on the two principles of security and governance. That is particularly true when it comes to Microsoft Teams, absolutely true when it comes to SharePoint. So just know that in that entire workplace transformation within Microsoft, we are here with resources to help you. So again, I'm Joe Paquette, really happy to be part of today's presentation. But as we move into the real content, I'm going to take this moment to introduce Jeff and Dave. And guys, I'm really looking forward to your presentation, and thanks in advance.
Thanks, Joe. As Joe had mentioned, I'm Jeff Forsyth. We have Dave Branscombe He's a senior cloud security architect with Microsoft. I'm technically the COO for the New Hampshire division. However, the role that I play most oftentimes is solution architect and technical advisor to customers. So today we're going to talk about the Power Platform. As Joe mentioned, there will be components of all three of the four items we'll talk about a little bit as we go through. Dave is going to go through an actual business scenario where this technology is leveraged within Microsoft itself and has been provided to other organizations as well. So we can get to the next slide. All right, so what is the opportunity here? The opportunity is providing better services to your customers. They could be external or they could be employees within your organization. And the thought here is that we want to drive efficiencies, we want to drive visibility, have transparency throughout the organization. And it doesn't matter how big your business is, these are goals that pretty much every organization tries to achieve. So collecting information, routing information, visualizing information to make sure that proper decisions are made. So that's the opportunity that we have with this technology stack. And next we'll talk about some of the challenges that you have trying to implement those types of processes or business processes. Next slide. All right, so Joe had mentioned this earlier. There are things that prevent customers, IT, whoever is actually facilitating it, from being successful. One of them is the resources, and that can be either a developer that's not available to you. It could be time, you just don't have the time to do it. It could be things like, lack of apps that talk to one another, data siloed, budget's always a huge thing, right? It costs a lot of money to develop custom apps. Whether you have the time or not, there's dollars associated with that effort. And then trying to get security and compliance to be part of the mix while providing a governance model such that IT is happy with whatever the solution is. So PowerApps kind of checks a lot of these boxes. I would say 90% of the boxes. I wouldn't say 100% of the boxes because there's still, there's still budget involved here. So going through that, I'll just kind of highlight some of the things with regards to what the industry is saying. Gartner itself, I think there's an updated version of this. If you want to go to the next slide, Dave. In September 2020, Microsoft was named the leader in low-code applications. So that's the stack, right? The Power Stack is considered low-code. It's very similar, and you'll see in the demo towards the end, everything is macro level. So if you've got folks that know how to manipulate Excel, they can certainly put together a Power App because they can sort of gain the insights and the education that's needed in order to manipulate a Power App by learning macros as opposed to manipulating lots of coding logic. Same thing with the Power Apps. Power Apps is more about dragging and dropping and doing decision making and just learning some techniques that can be repeated over and over for every branch of whatever the decision logic is there. So, Gartner recognized it in September 2021, and I was talking to Dave, and I think there's an updated slide out there with a updated position from Gartner. The next leader that is typically focused on highlighting technology trends is Forrester. And this is an older, outdated slide, but you can see from 2019 to 2020 to 2021, Microsoft is definitely in the spotlight for all of these researchers. So you can see there are others out there, but with how comprehensive the Dataverse is with Microsoft and the security and all the different layers, this is really probably the most comprehensive stack that's out there. You can look at other things like Salesforce, for instance, can give you some pieces and parts of it. ServiceNow is another big player out in the industry, but it's very siloed when it comes to the type of information you can gather and where that information goes. It's going to stay in their universe. With Microsoft, you can store information in SharePoint and spreadsheets, you can put it into SQL databases, you can put it into NoSQL databases, you can pretty much do whatever you want to get the data in and out of the system. So let's advance to the next slide and kind of talk about what the components that make up Power Apps are. So when I talk about Power Apps, I tend to focus on the first three. Power Virtual Agents is something that's come out in the past, say, year and a half. I've done a few projects with it. It's great technology. It probably is something that Dave will talk about a little bit in his slide deck, but most of the time it's just like chatbots, if you will. So that's what I typically think of when I think of Power Virtual Agents. It's got AI in it. For sure, but most customers start with things like Power Automate to move things around, or Power Apps to collect data, and then finally Power BI to analyze what that data is. So the heart of all of this is the data connectors. And the next slide kind of shows the breadth of what is possible. You can see all these different logos or tiles to the right here. Those are the systems that Microsoft or third-party application vendors have created in order to integrate with different services. So you'll see some of them to the right. You have Salesforce, you have Google Drive. Sometimes there are premium licenses that are required, and typically we try to stay away from those just to keep costs down. But there's obviously very powerful functionality in the premium connectors. So we can talk to you about what's right for your team. If you do need to connect to, say, an Oracle database, you can do it through the connector, or you can write your own connector. You can actually create your own connector, and we've done that many times as well for some of our customers to sort of get around the premium pricing if you needed to, or to implement it a slightly different way. But as it says here, there's over 350 connectors that are available to you, and it does allow you to go on-prem as well through a gateway, and that's like a reverse proxy connector. So we can talk about that with you as well. Dave, I think we're good probably for you to start running through the scenario if you want to take over control and start speaking through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So let's take a look at one way that these tools can be leveraged in real life. And as Jeff alluded to, the app that I'm going to show you here in these slides is nearly identical to the one that's actually being used within Microsoft. So I'm pretty familiar with how it works and the things that it can do. So one of the big challenges that we've seen over the last several months is how to help businesses answer the question, how do I manage a return to the workplace? And especially if you're in a relatively large organization like Microsoft, this can be a very complicated question to answer. You have to think about things like, what are the local laws and regulations about physical proximity to other coworkers? What are the needs of the facility each day to make sure that the facility is clean and safe? You have to make sure that the employees are coming back to work at the office, that they're comfortable with the situation that they're in, that they are able to stay healthy, and that they don't run the risk of infecting other people if they happen to come in contact with the virus. So the question is, how can Power Apps or Power Platform help? And so the example that we're looking at here is a combination of several different applications that can be used to accomplish exactly that. So let's take a quick look at just a couple of the features of these and see how it can do this. Now, if you think about a small business, the decision to return to the office might be a relatively easy one because maybe it only impacts a couple people, maybe only a single office. But when you start talking about larger organizations, even if they just have 2 or 3 locations and maybe 100 people, this can be a complicated decision. So if you think about some of the factors that you have to think about when you're making this decision, first of all, how do you actually make the decision to return? So it's not as simple as the boss saying, I'm really tired of working from home, my kids are driving me nuts, we all have to go back to the office, right? There's usually laws that direct what can and must be done as part of the return to the office. So along with those government restrictions and being kind of eased, and any health indications that are on the positive side, there has to be a discussion with local leadership around their comfort, the readiness of the employee population to return. You also have to start thinking about things like the site readiness, the health and safety of not just your employees, but what about external staff? What about your customers? What about vendors that come on site? How do you ensure that their health is protected, and that you're maintaining any social distancing guidelines, or distributing health and safety supplies, masks and hand washing equipment, things like that. You also have to think about how do you manage the people side of this? So there are probably people in your organization that are at higher risk of contracting COVID. And so how do you manage their health and their safety if they return back to the workforce? So there's a lot of different things that come into play. Tech support. So if someone has to do tech support and visit someone's desk, how is that handled? What are do they have to clean their hands before they touch your keyboard? That sort of thing. So all these things play into the decision to return to the workforce. And these are all, as I said, decisions that Microsoft is making right now. And it's a complicated one. So the decision needs to be made with data. It shouldn't be a decision that's based on emotion. It shouldn't be based on a whim. Where it's just some a date that's set in the sand that says we have to return by this point. It should be driven by data. And so that means you might have to identify hotspots where the virus is still an issue, and then compare that to places where it's under a bit more control. As you can see in the middle there, you can drill down into country, city, campus, even facility levels. And then once you've got a good picture of where things are safe, then you can build a readiness model that allows you to define the process by which your organization will be able to reopen. Oops, clicked forward too fast there. There we go. Now, one of the things that I mentioned was, how do you make your employees feel comfortable and safe? So there is a process by which you need to communicate out to your employees. What are the guidelines that you're putting in place? How are those guidelines going to be communicated out to your employees? Is it just an email? Is it on an app on their phone that they can read? How are the guidelines enforced? So do employees have to wear masks? Do they have to wear masks if they're vaccinated? Do they have to be vaccinated? All these are things that employers are trying to or that employers are trying to answer, because you want to make sure that their employees are comfortable returning to work, and not just that they're comfortable, but that they're actually safe returning to work. So one of the things that we can do is use an application like this. And like I said, this is almost identical to the one that we have at Microsoft. You authenticate using Azure Active Directory. You log in and verify who you are. It's branded. In this case, it says Contoso, but ours obviously says Microsoft. And then there's a self-service bot that streamlines the process of checking in. And so what happens is, when let me go ahead and move forward here, I'll show you. So this is actually the process that I would go through if I was going to request access to my local office. So I would specify the location that I want to go to. I would check in. A little questionnaire thing would pop up here that asks me about, do I have a fever? Have I been coughing? Have I been exposed to anybody with COVID? And then based on that, it might tell me, it sounds like you might need to go in for a test, or it might say, it sounds great. Here's your day pass. so that you can get into the location. Now, this day pass is digital, right? So what happens then is that day pass is then passed along to the receptionist at the office, and the receptionist activates my employee badge so that I can actually get into the office. So I can't just get into the office anytime I want. I have to go through this process of self-attestation to make sure that I'm from a health perspective, safe to come into the office. So that's one way that this can be done. And then, of course, one of the things that we've seen over time is that the situation changes. So over the summer, things kind of fluctuated. They got bad, and then they started to get a little bit better. And then with the Delta variant, some places had to get a little more restrictive again. So we also have to have a way of monitoring the situation in the areas where the offices are located and be able to adjust according to the local conditions. And so that's what these aspects of the applications are doing. Again, tracking data becomes the important piece here. That might mean, as you see on the left-hand side, identifying areas where there are what we call virus hotspots that may need to scale back the in-person work at the office. We may need to import data from local health authorities to identify areas of exposure. So there may be a significant pocket near your local office. Maybe, just as an example, maybe the UPS guy that delivers to every office in that neighborhood came down with COVID. And so potentially everyone that he came in contact with has been exposed. And so those types of things need to be tracked. And then, what the recommendations of the local health authorities are. The challenge is that you don't want the data to be so voluminous that it clouds the decision-making process. It makes it hard to make decisions. And so, as you see on the far right, you have to have executive-level dashboards that provide good situational awareness, so that an executive can easily read and digest the information and can make a clear and fact or data-based decision about what to do next. So as an example, based on the employee's responses, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the app recommends that the employee goes and gets tested. And then this is based on the symptoms that they're exhibiting. This may also mean that the coworkers need to be tested, and so the app may be configured so that the office manager or the site manager can send out a notification to everybody at the office that says, we recommend that everybody get tested due to possible exposure, right? I mean, you obviously don't say because Jim got COVID or something like that, but you let them know that there's been a potential exposure. Some of the challenges that organizations are facing. In going through all the things that we just talked about, if you were trying to do this with paper processes, it would be completely inefficient. You wouldn't be able to accomplish things in a manner that allowed you to make decisions in a reasonable time frame. So that's one of the challenges. How do you communicate with frontline workers? The people that aren't in front of a desk, in front of their email all day long, but maybe they're delivery drivers, or they work at a restaurant or something like that. How do you communicate with them? One of the challenges that we face at Microsoft, how do you hire people, right? How do you go through the interview and recruitment process when you can't sit down and talk to people? We've had to completely readjust the way that we perform the interview process. And don't forget, this is all very expensive for organizations. And that expense is being exacerbated, you might say, when they're also experiencing potentially a drop in business due to COVID. So imagine that you're a facilities manager and you have to coordinate all these things. Think about some of the logistics that have to be managed. So you have to track, first of all, whether your office is open or closed. But beyond that, you have to track how many people have come into the office. How close together are the desks, and how close are they allowed to sit if there's some kind of proximity regulation in the area where you've got an office? What about the rate of consumption of your cleaning supplies? What about the use of things like air filters, masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, all these things? Are they being consumed too quickly? All these things are data points that can be tracked in Power BI, and they can be surfaced through a Power App. And some of the simple processes, like reordering cleaning supplies, can be automated with Power Automate. And so that's what's some of the things, or some of the problems that are being solved with these aspects of the application, getting real-time data about who maybe has been exposed to COVID, letting the frontline staff know, maybe through a text message or something like that, that they need to perform a certain health check or whatever it might be. And then integrating with existing systems, like I mentioned, our badge card system, making sure that you're only allowed into the facility if you've gone through the self-health attestation process. So again, one of the things that the Power Platform excels at is giving you the ability to automate these processes and providing you with immediate access to actionable data that's useful in the process of making your decisions about returning to work. So what I've shown you so far is possible with the Power Platform. As you can see here, it's comprised of Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, and as Jeff mentioned, the Power Virtual Agents. But this isn't just a theoretical application or one that can only be created by a software company the size of Microsoft. New Era has actually developed this for a number of different customers, and what you're going to get now is a good look at how it actually works. So for that, I'll turn things back over to Jeff.
Thanks, Dave. All right. So as mentioned before, if we look at the next slide, there are a few components that make up the Power Platform. I'm going to start with the Power App. Then I'm going to jump into Power BI just to show something very simple. And then we'll time according, if it allows, we'll do a little Power Automate. I will stay away from Power Virtual Agent, but I can tell you it's just interactive, and you program responses and decision trees, very similar to what you might do in Power Automate when you see that, and it allows you to hang it off your website, or some companies use it internally for quick answers, like how do I reset my password, and they'll send out links to articles, and or hey, if you need to reset your password in Office 365, click on this and it brings you right to the screen. So there's that self-help component to it. And you can also tap it into other data sources too. So if you have a CRM and you have a knowledge base somewhere, that's what we've done before, is keyword searches bring into different decision trees, which will go reach out to knowledge base type articles. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Kristen, if you could flip it over so I could do that. Great. So here, all of those out there that have worked with me or spoken to me before know I'm a big proponent of SharePoint. I tend to use that a lot of times as a repository of information. It's much more than just a database, but you can use it as a database. Power Apps can talk to lots of different endpoints. Those are the connectors. Oftentimes we'll connect it to an Excel spreadsheet if it's a simple application, but if you want it to scale, oftentimes SharePoint's a great way to do that, because you can add permissions and things like that that you can't necessarily do in just a flat file, which is Excel. So I've created a leave request list behind the scenes. There's a couple of other lists we won't get into, but we've built applications using this same exact process. Jeremy's got a great one. He's Jeremy Morel. He's on our team, and he's created a really nice leave app. I can show you a couple of pictures of it, but I don't have it wired up in our environment, where you can illustrate what the company holidays are so that you don't try to request a time off for something that you're already getting off. You've got leave balances. So if you have a person that starts mid-year and you need to put a bank of hours in for that particular person, then that would get tracked here from the time they were hired on. And then there's an accrual policy that we kind of set up typically that'll say, if you're this many years employed, you might get this added every single month. So it increments your leave balance, and then when your leave request gets approved, it decrements your leave balance. So I'm starting with just the leave request. If you were in SharePoint, you can do the typical, hey, let me fill on all these fields, but you can't do that on your mobile device as easily as what I'm going to show you here. So SharePoint gives you this really nice quick menu that says, hey, if I want to visualize the list, I can click on this and it's going to automatically do a bunch of stuff for me. Power Automate, I can create a flow against this list, and we're going to start with PowerApps. So I can customize the form if I want to, which will change the behavior of this new button here. So if I wanted to hide or show certain things, like if based upon the leave type, if I had something that was sick time, maybe it wouldn't allow me to select, a start time or an end date. It would just use the current date, something like that. We can change the way that the form interacts by using Power Automate, or Power Apps rather. I usually call those Power Forms just to differentiate the two. I'm going to actually create an app. So in here, it's going to say, what do I want to call it? I'm going to say PTO requests. And it's checking to see if that's been created before. It hasn't. It's going to bring you to the PowerApps Studio, and it's going to actually connect it because I'm from a SharePoint list. It already knows everything there is about that particular list, and in the background, it's building a model and connecting it to that list. Now, I could start from scratch and get a blank canvas, but then I have to connect it up. I have to pull in all the fields. I have to do a bunch of other stuff. So that's just the quickest way to get something up and running. So as it's building that, there's a couple of things that we're going to do. One is this is going to be a blank kind of palette that we're going to say, I got to fill out some data. Well, it does its best to give you a couple of screens. One is just kind of a listing of leave requests. So this, you think about this being on your mobile phone. If you were to kind of play this, you can push the play button. So this is my mobile phone, let's say, and I wanted to create a new leave request. And I can put information in here. And again, it looked at the SharePoint list, and it did create the fields and kind of lay them out in the order in which they were defined in SharePoint. So I'm just going to say test 1, and then it's going to pick a particular day here, 12/31. That's what it does as default because that's the first date that it has. So if I wanted to put this particular date, the 22nd, and through the 28th, I can put it in there, right? It doesn't have any information about who's requesting this, who the approver is. So if I hit submit, it's going to save the information. You're going to put it into this list, but it's not really quite right. Like there's some information that I would have expected the application to automatically fill. So we're just going to go through, make some changes so you can see kind of how easy the macros are to work with. By default, like I said, there's a browse screen. You click on this, it's going to bring you to the detail screen. The detail screen is just going to be like the display view of things. And then you have the edit screen, which is where most of the work that we'll do is going to take place. So first things first, I think that what it should do is actually pull in who I am, who's requesting it. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually make a connection. So I can go over here, view data sources. If I click on this, it brings me down here as well. Add a data source. And then there's a whole bunch of different connectors. I'm going to use this connector for Office 365 users. This will allow me to kind of interrogate the Office 365 tenant and get information using this connection. So now that I have the connection, I can go back up here. Oops. Let me just go to this layer, and I'm going to find a couple of things you have to do here. So if I click on requester, it's the layout, and the layout includes an error message, validation, a value, and a data card. So it's kind of like the whole component. So you got a label here, you've got the value, it's an input, and then you have the layout, which adds padding around here. I usually select this top level, and then you have to go into advanced and unlock it so that I can make changes. So now that it's unlocked, you'll see that the default value here, if I click on this, I can edit it here, or oftentimes I'll go up here because it gives me a little bit more real estate, and I'll say whatever the default value is. So this is reading in from the list. And because I just added that connector, which was Office 365 users here, you'll see that if I type ahead, it gives me that particular object to select. I usually hit the back key so that I can then select the kind of the next option, and it's going to show me a list of what I can pick. So I'm going to say my profile, right? I'm going to get who I am. I'm going to be the requester. And then it's going to ask me what attribute do I want to pull in. So if I hit the dot notation here, it'll give me all the information that it can get from my profile. So I could put my company name. I'm going to put my display name here. So as I do that, you'll notice that it up here kind of gave you what it was going to equate to. So it's going to have Jeff Forsyth. So here's my requester. Much like I'm the one requesting, somebody needs to approve it. So I'm going to do the exact same thing in the approver card, unlock it so I can do something, select the default value. Oops. And then I'm going to say Office 365 users. And then in here, I'm going to say manager. And you'll see that there's a version 2. Anytime there's a version 2, definitely use the version 2 version of it. And then for here, I'm going to say, because this is a lookup and I need to tell it what object do I want to find the manager for. It's not my manager until I tell it to look up my profile and pass it in as an attribute. So I'm going to say Office 365 users. And then here I'm going to put my profile v2. And then I'm going to give it my mail address so that it has something to look up against. And then I'm going to put the display name. So that's going to go back into Office 365, and it just ran the formula, and my manager is Sean Doherty. So this would give me all that I need in order for me to submit a form, because it would say, okay, I have Sean Doherty, Jeff Forsyth is the person requesting it, it's pre-filled that, and then I could go off and I could, submit an entry, and I wouldn't have to type that information in. Other things you noticed before is that the date field, when I run it, if I hit run again, so all along here, I can continue to kind of debug and tweak things. One of the things that I've always wanted to do is make sure that when I put a request in, I pre-fill the start date, and I say, you know what, I'm going to make sure that it starts on today's date. So as simple as it sounds, we're going to put the default value in as just today. So it's going to say it's 10/21 as the date. So that's the value that's going to be in here. And then again, the end date, one of the things I want to do here, unlock it, is I don't want the start date and end date to default on the same date, because I'm assuming that someone's going to take a day off and they're going to return the next day. Now you'd have to provide the hours. You can certainly put it to the next date and back it to the current date, which is today, and then just say I'm going to start at 8 o'clock and I'm only going to take a half day if you wanted to. But for this, I'm going to put in tomorrow's date just to show you what you can do. So again, always start with today. And those of you that know Excel, this is very familiar for you. So I'm going to just put in what's today's date and add 1 to it. Let's just make sure that took. All right, so today +1. There we go. So that's it. So if I save this, it's going to keep a different version. So anytime you make a change, you can actually see the versions. So if I wanted to see all the different versions that are out there, it will show them to me in case I need to roll something back or I'm working on something. You see that version 1's here. Version 2 is not. So the first version that I have is the one that's being used. So if I were to give somebody this URL, that would be what they would be using while in the background I'm making those additional changes. So if I hit publish, then that particular application is going to be the live version. So if I refresh this, then version 2 is going to be the live version. So if I ever needed to roll back, I can restore it, I can delete it, I can do whatever I need to. So that kind of shows you all of the quick changes that you can make, plus the version control, and then hit the back button here, and we can continue editing or changing things if we want to. So that is the Power App component. Very, very simple. So I'm going to just put another entry in here. I'm going to close this. Bear with me a second and I'll go back up to the browse screen. So I'm going to hit play here. I'm going to add another entry and I'm going to call this test 2. And you'll notice that it selected the date of today and tomorrow. And I have my name and Sean as the requester. And now we have 2 entries. So if I wanted to look at the first entry, it's here, hit edit, and then I could change the date and update it here, and then it's going to go back. So it gives you kind of a quick UI, and then if I wanted to do test 2, search already works. So as you can imagine, very quickly, low code, very quickly you can enter an app for the mobile experience and then have it capture the data here. So now if you come back here, you'll see the 2 different test 1 and test 2 requests got populated in SharePoint. So that's pretty simple. The next thing I'm going to go to first is, are there any questions? I know we haven't really broke for any type of questions. If you have some, you can put them in the questions app of the GoToWebinar, and I'll take a look at that again if there are some.
Jeff, we do have one question that came through.
Sure.
Could it check the presence of a value to be true?
Yes, so you can have things, different validation. So if, for instance, on the Power App itself, if we wanted to, let me close this. If you wanted to see on a list on the edit form, if we had a checkbox or the status was changed. So for instance, like let's say the leave type was I don't know, bereavement or something like that. And maybe there's a policy that would say that you can't have any more than 1 day of bereavement, or you have to put in for each day. Then it could check to see if that value is set, and then here it could say, okay, I'm not going to let you select an end date because your bereavement's going to be on one particular day. I think that's a horrible example, but that's something that just popped in my head. So also validation, right? So if it didn't find an approver for some reason, let's say Active Directory wasn't set up correctly, it could prevent you from submitting it, or it could do something like, hey, if I didn't get a manager back, then I'm going to send it to maybe like a default HR person because something's not set up in the system, and I shouldn't be penalized because IT didn't set it up correctly. I need to get it approved. So those are the kind of things that you'd want to do with a Power App. All right. Next, I'm going to show a real quick demo of Power BI, because once you start gathering information, there may be, for other folks, and this is going to be very, very simple, other folks that might want to visualize the information to know, how many people, like if you were to collect the department, and for any given time, they wanted to ensure that there was a certain amount of coverage for, say, the IT department. You would create possibly a Power BI report and allow the end user to visualize, okay, well, for this particular month, we've got 2 people in IT going on vacation. So before I go and approve that request, I better make sure that there's not other people asking for vacation time off because I've already approved them or whatever the case may be. All right, so I type in SharePoint because that's what I want to connect to. I'm going to connect to an online list, hit connect. Real quick, I'm just going to grab this URL so I don't have to type the whole thing in. I always use beta version 2. It'll ask me another question, possibly as far as how do I want to log into it. All right, so I had already logged in at some point in time, so it's not going to ask me. But if it does, there's 3 different options. Most of the time, you're going to want to use the Windows work account because you're probably working in Office 365. But Power BI does work on premise as well, so you might have a Windows login that you need to provide. So for here, I'm going to select Leave Requests. And it's going to say, oh, there's two fields or 2 entries there. And I'm going to say load the data. One thing that you will notice when you're using Power BI is if data in the background changes, it's not automatically going to reload because it assumes that you want to work on the report. You actually have to tell it to refresh. Similar things happen in Excel when you're connected to a remote data source, but you can see that it loaded 2 rows, and we'll just wait for it to come back. And in the background, it's created a model. So on the right-hand side, we're going to see fields that are available to us. So some of them are going to be calculated columns that Power BI has already figured out, hey, maybe you want this information to be a calculation or a measure. So if we come down here, we're going to see that they assumed because there was an ID field, a number, that we probably wanted to sum it. Well, that doesn't really make sense because that's the indicator for our record. So we would never really want to sum that value. But if there was dollar amounts associated with it and it picked that up, then yeah, you might want to have a summation of how many dollars an invoice was, or the aggregate of expense report or something like that. So first thing we have to do is we have to actually figure out how we want something displayed. So the easiest thing to do is use the table. So within the table, I'll drop this down a little bit. And then all I have to do is say, what fields do I want? I'm going to take the requester. I'm going to take the start date. I'm going to take the end date. And I'm going to also put the approver in there. So one of the things you'll actually see is that it did something kind of funky with the year, quarter, month. That's because there's a hierarchy in a date. All you have to do here is just say, no, I just want the date, not the date hierarchy. So you just change it to that. So we have the actual start date and end date. And then, we can take a look. Let me just move this over. You can format it. And then one of the other things I usually do is some sort of visual slicer. And one of the things I want to show you is you can get more visual visualizations or widgets. So I'm going to say get more. And it's going to bring up, they're not connectors, they're just little widgets that someone has created. And you can buy some. There's some that are out there that are free. I usually end up using some that Microsoft has actually created. And one of the ones that I really like is this time slicer. The default time slicer expects you to have like a start date and an end date, which isn't as friendly. So it's just added it right here. So this right here just got added. So it says it's okay. So if I put this on the page, let me do this. Let me move out of here. I select this, it just replaced it. I didn't mean to do that. So I have to unclick out of that and then put the slicer here. And then again, this needs to know what you want to work on. So I'm going to say, I care about the start date. I don't care about anything else. So I'm going to put the start date in there. And here, yeah, start date. And I'll make it a little bit bigger so it shows up. So you can see this one says October. There's one entry in here, and then I can save it. So this is how I'll just put PTO requests. And then I'll go back into SharePoint and I'll just create a new one just real quick. Let me run it through here. All right, so I'll just create a new one. And I'll say test 3, and then I'll just change the date so that it's November 23rd. So we'll take some vacation around Thanksgiving. And we could also have put things such as, validations. When this date moves, take this date plus whatever. But what I did was just today plus 1. I could say start date plus 1, and that would have given me a better user experience. All right, so this still has test. So now I have three items in here. What you'll notice here is that I'll have to say refresh data. So if I click on this refresh, takes a little while. Come on. This is acting really slow today. See, it's trying to reload that pane. Usually if you publish it, it's running on the server, and it's going to go a lot faster. But you can say like whatever month it is, and you'll see that I have one in November and one in October. So as I change anything in this, it's related. So all these filters and slicers and things like that are related to one another. So if I wanted to see how many are in October, it's going to show that. If I select both of these dates, then I could, like if I looked at year, it's 2021. I can select the whole thing and it's going to show me all of them that are set up. That first record, it was messed up because it didn't actually store the date correctly. So you'll see the two here. We got one from October, one for November. You can do it by quarter, month, and then week. So it actually sorts it out by each week. That's why I like this particular slicer. It's very good for financial type data if you're looking at how your company's doing from a quarter budget to actuals. So I have about 2 more minutes. I'm just going to quickly show you how you'd hang a Power Automate off of this. Again, if you come up here, they've sort of set up a couple of different things for you. I can say create a flow, and it says customize email when a new item is added. It's going to log me in. And then it's going to use whatever users logged in to establish these connectors or these connections. So it's going to use my Office 365 permissions to establish this flow. So it's important to understand that, because if you create usually like a service account for someone to create the flows under, it's a better practice than me creating them all under my account, and then all of a sudden they decide to leave the organization, my account could shut down, therefore this flow stops running. But this is what Power Automate looks like. You'll get a couple of different things. So when a new item is created, because I select it from this list, it's automatically going to associate it to that URL and then that list. If I created it from scratch, it's just going to generate it based upon what I put in here. So there's a drop down which will show me all the different sites that I have access to. Get my user profile is just whoever's running. It's going to, whoever kicked it off, it's going to get the given name and email, and then it's going to send hi, my name, and it's going to say a new item. And there's some functions that are in here. If you look at the expressions, it's just going to get the created date. So it's going to say was added at the date by, and this is going to be the author. That's whoever created it. And you can see this macro in here says the display name. If it doesn't find it, it'll say someone. So if for some reason it didn't find my name, then it would just put someone in there as a default value. And then you can see here the name that I gave the item, which would have been like XYZ. It got set up. So if I save this and I create another item here through the Power App, let's just do test 4. Then back here, you'll be able to see it takes a little while because it's based upon a trigger. You can buy the premium version of this and it pulls every so often. If you don't pay for the higher price stuff, it could take up to 5 minutes for it to trigger. And most times that's not a big deal. The other benefit you could do is we could wire this up so that when they hit the update or the save button, that it automatically called this flow. So that can happen as well. And then that way you don't have to wait for the trigger to happen. So there's 2 different ways to run the flow. So that's going to happen in the background. I'll get an email. Most likely what I would do in the flow, as opposed to one I just showed you, was I would actually edit it and look up look up your manager. So if I didn't want to put it in the Power Automate button here as part of the application, what I could have done is not selected the approver and just found out who the requester was. And so in the Power Automate, I could have looked up that my manager was Sean Doherty and sent him an email for approval. I tend to like doing it in the UI so the person who's filling it out can see where it's going to go. And then if there's an issue with it or it doesn't find it, they could actually know that there might be a problem with it sending it. So let's see if this has run yet. Nope, not yet. There it goes. So it's running right now. You can click on it here and we probably will miss it, but it'll show you each step of the way. So it tells you, when the item was created and it gives you all the information, who created it, all the fields will get dumped out here. And then it gets my profile or show me up. Yeah, it found my email address and my given name is Jeff. And then it's going to send an email. And this is what it, would have sent. Hi, Jeff, a new item was created at, here's the date. And then what's the test? And then my email just dinged and you'll see it in there as well. So that's just a quick way that you can kind of get everything set up and going using the 3 components. Of course, this is very rudimentary. We have kind of full baked solutions that are out there. So if you have any interest in this technology and you want to talk further, I think it makes sense for us to have a conversation. So in parting here, if you had questions, they weren't answered, please fill out the event survey. That happens when you leave the webinar, it'll pop up. But in addition to that, Kristen will be sending out a survey in an email as well. So if you don't have the opportunity to fill it out now because I've made you late for your next meeting, please fill it out on an email and then we'll schedule a meeting to go through it in more depth and talk about your business and what scenarios or business scenarios that this technology could potentially help you with. So with that said, thank you so much for joining. And again, thanks Dave for your support and for Microsoft's support in bringing all this technology to us and then helping us explain it to our customers. Have a good day, all.
Absolutely.